I lied about a DNA test to save my brother's family. It was the worst decision of my life. I never imagined that an ordinary white envelope could shatter a person's entire destiny. But that's exactly what happened the moment I clutched the results of the genetic analysis for my brother. I'm not a criminal, I'm not a con artist, yet sometimes deception wounds deeper than any lawbreaking, because it forces you to meet the eyes of your loved ones and feign joy, knowing that behind that mask lurks a time bomb. My name is Michael, I'm 36 years old, and it all started about 2 years ago in the suburbs of Seattle, where days flow steadily. Similar cottages, similar residents, traditional barbecues on Saturdays. My younger brother Alex has always been a lucky guy. He had a prestigious job, a charming wife Laura, and the status of perfect son in our family. And me, I was just his older relative. A programmer, single, overly straightforward, and probably too principled. Funny, right? When Laura announced the upcoming child, the whole clan rejoiced. Our parents shed tears of happiness. Alex glowed like a teenager, but a few weeks later a crack appeared in his shine. Rumors circulated that Laura had a lover. A colleague, a young, handsome guy from the advertising department. I refused to believe it until Alex called me at 4 in the morning. "Mike, I can't sleep a wink," his voice trembled. "What if the baby isn't mine?" "Alex, you're delirious. Of course it's yours." I need to be sure. I'll break if it turns out otherwise." I was at a loss, unable to find words. He seemed on the edge of a cliff. I noticed how he clenched his fists, how his gaze wandered. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was hysteria on the verge of madness. A week later, Laura gave in to the pressure and agreed to the test. She seemed offended, but did it for the sake of family peace. And I became a link in the chain. Sending, receiving, documents, everything went through me. It so happened that the envelope with the verdict ended up in my hands. And at that moment, I realized that in my fingers were the fates of 3 souls. I didn't want to open it. But Alex insisted. He said, "I can't if it's the worst. Just tell me, prepare me." I opened it. 3 phrases. 3 ordinary expressions capable of tearing his existence to shreds. Not the biological parent. I froze. Then reread it. Then again. Then sank to the carpet, feeling the reality around me go silent. Laura, his perfect other half. Their union, their home. And this little one, for whom he had already bought a plush bunny. I imagined it all collapsing before my eyes, while the paper rested in my palms. I didn't immediately realize what I intended to do. If someone had asked me that day if I planned to deceive, I would have denied it. But deception rarely arises as a strategy, more often as a quiet whisper from an inner voice, maybe postpone, maybe reveal the truth later. Only later never comes. I sat in the living room with the envelope as a morning ray pierced through the glass. Outside, a delivery van sped by, a dog barked, the usual hum. And in my palms rested life, like in youth when you hold a fledgling, one extra squeeze and it's over. I wasn't sure of my actions, I just didn't want my brother to fall. You see, Alex has always been the pillar for the family. After Dad's death, he took on the role of head of the house. He cared for Mom, covered my loans, even paid for my car repair when I lost my job. He's the one who bails everyone out. And now I watched as he risked losing everything. Because of one mistake, because of the woman he adored. I remember staring at those lines, not the biological parent. Like someone fired into a wall, and the bullet lodged in my soul. And I realized, if I hand him this document, he won't hold up. He's not the explosive type. He's the one who bends silently. And I'd seen it before, after the accident with Dad when Alex stood by the bed and muttered, "I should have gone instead." That's when I first understood how much he absorbs others' suffering as his own. I spent what felt like a whole day with these thoughts. The envelope lay opposite on the surface. Next to it, tea, long cold, and my phone ringing every 30 minutes. "Mike, did you pick it up? What's inside?" I ignored it. And then I just turned on the computer. Yes, that simply. I typed up an alternative verdict, with the wording, "is the biological parent." Printed it out, imitated the clinic's stamp, found an image online, adjusted the typography. I'm not bragging, but at that moment it seemed like I was doing the right thing. I didn't feel like a villain, I felt like family. The one who protects the clan while it can still be saved. When I delivered the envelope to Alex, he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Shadows under his eyes, stubble, hands trembling. Laura sat nearby, silent, anxious. I handed over the message. He tore it open right there. His pupils scanned the text until they caught the key part. And then I saw him burst into tears. But they were tears of relief. He hugged Laura, laughed, shook, repeating, I knew it was my boy. She sobbed too, but they were different sobs I could see. In them was not peace, horror. Like she realized there was no turning back. I stood aside, feeling my insides twist. I had achieved what seemed worth the effort. I saved the family. I bailaid out my brother. But returning to my apartment and locking the door, it overwhelmed me. At first, subtly, just emptiness. Then an inner whisper arose. You didn't bail him out, you destroyed reality. Weeks passed. The baby was born, a boy, Noah. I first saw him at the clinic. Tiny, wrinkled, with big blue eyes that were not Alex's. He looked like that guy. I'd studied his photos online, couldn't erase them from memory. Laura tried to avoid my gaze. Every visit made her shrink, like I reminded her of what happened. Alex, meanwhile, was ecstatic. He cradled the child, shared that he finally felt like a parent. He sparkled like a star, and every time I saw that light, I broke inside. One day, he invited me to a picnic. Everyone around, friends, Laura's parents. Fun, music, grill aroma, children's chatter, it seemed perfect. And only I sat in the corner, watching as Alex held the little one and said, You know, Mike, I'm grateful to you. Without your help, I wouldn't have made it. I forced a smile, but inside something cracked. It wasn't guilt, realization that my deception had now come to life. It grows, giggles, calls him Dad. Almost a year passed, and all this time I lived in two realities. In one, I was the beloved uncle, relative, part of the happy circle. In the other, I woke up nights in cold sweat, dreaming of that envelope. I tried to convince myself I chose right. That sometimes deception is an expression of care. That truth isn't always necessary if it shatters destinies. But deep down I knew it wasn't care, it was panic. Panic of losing the harmony that was already hanging by a thread. The first alarm sounded the day Alex got sick. Minor, just a cold, but the doctor ordered blood tests. For safety, for records, just in case. A week later, Laura called me. Her tone vibrated. Michael, there's some mix-up at the center. They said genetically Alex can't be the real father of the baby. It's a mistake, right? I froze. The world shrank again to her breaths. You don't think that? Of course a mistake, I interrupted. It happens, they mix up samples. I rambled quickly, firmly, like one convincing not her but himself. Laura fell silent, then whispered, Michael, I remember you brought the envelope. You didn't do anything. I hung up. From that moment, everything began to crumble. Not abruptly, gradually. Like a crack, at first invisible, then spreading across the surface until it breaks. Alex started noticing Laura acting strange. He questioned me about what was going on, and I evaded. He began suspecting she was fooling him again. And I stood between them, like the one who once tried to save the bridge, now watching it collapse under the weight of his own deception. Sometimes truth doesn't burst out with a scream. It seeps slowly, like water dripping for decades into one cut until it erodes the rock. And suddenly everything collapses, not from a loud confession, but because it simply couldn't hide anymore. About 2 weeks after Laura's call, I first realized my forgery was taking on a life of its own, no longer under control. Alex called in the evening, said he'd drop by. His timbre seemed unusual, not aggressive, not anxious, rather empty. Like something in him had already died, leaving a vacuum. He arrived unannounced late, when I was already preparing for bed. Rain poured outside, and he stood in the doorway, soaked through with some folder. I'll never erase his appearance from memory. Calm, even excessively so, like one who wants neither excuses nor salvation. I need you to look at this, he said, and his tone was even almost impassive. He pulled sheets from the folder, medical reports, lab printouts, genetic test confirmations. But these weren't the papers I had once fabricated. These were new, from another hospital in another state. Impossible to confuse. They rechecked 3 times, he whispered. No mistake possible. He raised his eyes to me, and I knew he already knew. Not just suspected, but knew. And the worst, I saw that all these years he trusted me more than her. I wanted you to tell me yourself, he uttered, and those words twisted me inside. I couldn't inhale or exhale. I realized that every word, every movement now would be either the final step to absolution or a new lie that would bury me forever. I lowered my gaze and for the first time in all this time, spoke the truth. Yes, I switched the results. He didn't roar. He just stood looking at me, and in his eyes there was no rage, no torment. Just complete, icy serenity, scarier than any roar. Why, he asked eventually. I tried to explain, to say I wanted to protect him, that I didn't want his collapse, that I saw his torment. But the more I elaborated, the clearer I realized it sounded like a pathetic excuse. You chose for me, he interrupted. You decided I couldn't handle reality, that I'm weaker than you, that I need deception to exist. He spoke quietly, but each word cut sharply. You deprived me of choice, me, him, everyone. He turned and headed for the door without looking back. Before leaving, he added, I thought Laura betrayed me. Turns out you did. The door slammed, and I was left in the dark, feeling something inside finally collapse. I don't remember how long I stood motionless. Then I sank to the carpet, buried my face in my knees, and couldn't breathe for a long time. The following days were like a dream. Laura called, then went silent. Alex's mom called once, said briefly, You did what you did, now live with it, and hung up. It seemed like the whole neighborhood knew. On the sidewalks, people greeted as before, but in every glance I read bewilderment. Is that the relative? I tried to justify myself, repeated that I acted out of attachment, that I protected the clan, not destroyed it. But the more I repeated, the less I believed my own words. Because attachment isn't about control, not about falsehood. Attachment is about trust. And that's what I destroyed. A few weeks later, Alex left. He separated from Laura, initiated the divorce, packed his bags, and took the baby with him. Not to punish her, but to shield the boy from the fights that flared between them. He said he wasn't sure whose child Noah was, but now it was secondary. He would raise him because the child is innocent. Those words somehow hit harder than anything. He could accept a stranger, but not me. And I couldn't blame him. I tried to talk to him multiple times, but he ignored calls, didn't open the door. When I finally showed up at his place, he simply said, Mike, go, we both know you didn't mean harm, but what's done can't be undone. He stood on the threshold, and behind him, Noah, that same boy, now a bit older, with those same blue eyes that reminded me every time that deception has a face. I looked at the child, then at Alex, and realized between us was an abyss that couldn't be bridged. I left without saying goodbye. A year passed. I changed addresses, jobs, tried to restart life. But some shadows don't retreat. You can change cities, contacts, even identity, but not escape yourself. Sometimes I look at old photos, me and Alex, how in youth we built huts, skateboarded, how he pulled me out of scrapes, how I swore I'd always be there. And I realize the scariest thing in this story isn't even the deception. It's that I betrayed the one who relied on me unconditionally. Recently, I ran into Laura by chance. She looked exhausted but composed. We froze in the store, awkwardly glanced at each other, then she approached and said, He knows you meant well, he just can't process it. I nodded, not knowing what to say. She stared at me, sighed, and added, And I am probably grateful to you, because without you it would have ended even worse. She turned and left, and I stood, feeling a strange sensation. Not comfort, not absolution, but realization that sometimes in saving, you provoke the collapse yourself. Now I live alone. I write this story not for pity or justification. I just want someone after reading it to understand. Reality, whatever it is always better than falsehood. Falsehood gives a reprieve, but it always returns, only no longer as a sheet in an envelope, but as emptiness in the soul that can't be patched. I don't know if my brother will ever forgive me. Maybe not. But if one day he stumbles upon this, I want him to understand. I did it not out of malice, not out of selfishness, but out of fear of losing him. And that fear cost me everything. 6 years is an era if you coexist with remorse. Every awakening with the feeling that someone is pressing on your chest, weighing down your breath, and you can't shake it off. At first you resist, then adapt, then just learn to coexist, like with an aching old injury that bothers only in bad weather but doesn't disappear. I haven't spoken to Alex all these years. Not from lack of attempts, but from not knowing how. Any message, any note seemed either trivial or belated. What do you say to someone whose trust you trampled? Sorry, not enough. I miss you, too selfish. I need you, pointless if you're not wanted. I left Denver and moved to Austin. There I got a job at a modest agency that published works by unknown writers and classic poetry anthologies. The work was quiet, almost hermit-like, and apparently that's what I needed. Day after day I followed this routine, latte editing, silence, twilight. Sometimes in the evenings I'd play retro tunes and think that maybe this is what absolution looks like, not through grand acts, but through small, unnoticed steps. But past events don't know how to stay silent. They always find a way back, not in the form of sensations or calls, but through random intersections. One day in late autumn, I was walking through the park and heard a call. Mr. Harris. I turned. Standing before me was a boy about 10, with tousled blonde curls and huge blue eyes. I immediately recognized who it was, even before he said, "You're my dad's relative, right?" I didn't know how to react. Noah had grown. Now there's less of Laura in him and more of Alex, especially in the smile. I felt my insides squeeze from old agony and sudden warmth. Yes, I whispered, I suppose so. He smiled childishly openly. Dad mentioned you were once best buds. Why don't you see each other anymore? I froze. Words stuck. How do you explain to a child that adults sometimes break what can't be fixed, even if they didn't mean harm? It's a complicated story, I forced out. We fought because of a mistake. Because of Mom, he asked directly, and I realized Alex hadn't hidden the past from him, but apparently told it more delicately than he could have. I nodded. Yes, because of adults who did stupid things. He thought for a moment, then said, Dad said everyone does stupid things sometimes. The main thing is to try to make up for them afterward. Those words hit like an electric shock. I stood looking at him and realized, here it is, the chance I don't deserve, but fate gave anyway. Not to restore the old, but for at least a small balancing. We chatted more, about school, his cat, his baseball team. Before parting, he suddenly said, Dad isn't mad at you, he just gets sad when he remembers. And he left, leaving me in the middle of the autumn park under drizzling rain, with the feeling that the universe had shifted a bit, not in my favor, but at least toward truth. After that, I couldn't find peace for several days. I paced the apartment like a cage and realized that if I don't risk again, I'll be stuck in this limbo forever. So I sat down, pulled out an old notebook, and began to write. Not a letter, not repentance. A story. I described how it all began. How I watched Alex crumble under the weight of betrayal, and how I feared losing him. About how I fabricated the verdict, convinced it was for the good. About how that good turned to poison. I didn't justify myself, just laid it out as it was. When I finished, it was over 40 pages. I printed it, put it in an envelope, and sent it. Without a signature, without a return address. Just a brief note, this is reality, do with it as you see fit. A month passed. Then another. No response. I already thought the message was lost, or more likely just thrown away. But one evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened and froze. Alex stood on the threshold, the same but changed. With gray at the temples, tired eyes, but without that anger I kept in memory. He clutched my envelope crumpled, with a coffee stain on the edge. I read it, he said, several times. We were silent for a long time. He entered, sat down, and between us hung that silence that could be called sacred. Not from comfort, from the fact that it holds everything that no longer needs words. I hated you, he said eventually, thought I'd never let go. But then I realized you were just scared, just like I was scared of reality back then. And maybe if I were in your place, I don't know if I'd do differently. He raised his eyes, and for the first time in so many years, smiled. We both lost too much, maybe enough. I couldn't respond, just nodded. A lump in my throat, and the only thing that escaped. Thank you. He got up, intending to leave. At the door, he turned and added, Noah wants to see you. Drop by sometime, but without explanations, just as an uncle. When the door closed, I sank to the carpet, like that night once. But now I cried not from agony, but from that unusual feeling that comes only after true absolution. It's not like bliss. It's quieter, heavier, but purer. Since then, I visit them sometimes. Not regularly, not intrusively. Just on weekends, help Noah with homework, teach him to build old gadgets. Alex doesn't touch the past, and neither do I. We just exist. Sometimes, when he steps away for a drink, I look at Laura's photo on the shelf and think that maybe it wasn't in vain. Maybe sometimes falsehood can indeed save, but only if afterward you're ready to pay in full for the truth. Absolution isn't a moment. It's a path. It's not everything's okay, but I remember, but I choose to move forward. And apparently, that's what I finally understood. I'm not the one who switched the analysis. I'm the one who admitted what was done and learned not to hide behind excuses. Sometimes I think that if it were possible to turn back time, I'd choose differently. But maybe this failure made me into a person capable of caring without panic. And if that's the price for absolution, I'm ready to pay it to the end. March 23. Rain has been pouring since dawn, slow, thick, like above they decided to wash away the remnants of cold, but unhurriedly. I sit at the surface, the same one that stood in my old apartment in Denver, and for the first time in years took a stylus not for work, but just to write. A message. To you, Alex. Though honestly, I'm not sure I really intend to send it. Maybe it's for me, not as a way to reach out, but as a way to release. You know, sometimes I catch myself thinking that I don't remember how it all began. Not the act itself, but that exact moment where it all rolled downhill. When panic overcame attachment. When the desire to protect became the desire to manipulate. When falsehood appeared as a lesser evil than reality. Maybe it happened that twilight when you first said you weren't sure Noah was your offspring. I watched everything collapse in you, and I couldn't bear it. I convinced myself I have to help. I didn't mean harm. I just wanted you not to suffer. And then suddenly realized I turned you into someone coexisting not with pain, but with illusion, and maybe that's even worse. I've thought a lot about this in recent years, about how sometimes care and fear walk hand in hand. We care and panic about losing. We protect and maim. We deceive from the best motives. But that's no excuse. I no longer seek excuses. I just want you to know I understood. Your pain isn't my mistake back then. It's my burden for life after. And I'm not trying to slip away from it. You said I was just scared. You were right. But I'm not scared anymore. When I watch Noah grow, how he smiles, how he looks at you, I realize life still found a way to balance. You became the parent you always dreamed of. And maybe what I once destroyed, the world eventually built differently, not by my whim, but perhaps even better that way. I don't beg you to ever call me relative again. I don't beg for trust. I don't beg for the past. I'm just grateful that we now have the present. That you allow me to be near Noah. That when we sit in the kitchen and he shares his childish tales, you don't look away. That's absolution, not words but silent permission to stay. If you're reading this message, it means I still dared to send it. If not, it will remain here in the notebook, where I keep what can no longer be said. But maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's for me. Because for the first time in many years, I don't feel the weight on my chest. Not because the pain is gone, but because I finally stopped fighting it. I accepted it as part of myself. Maybe that's where absolution lies. Not in receiving forgiveness, but in learning yourself to live worthy of the one you once betrayed. I step out onto the terrace. The rain has almost stopped. The air smells of wet wood and soil, like everything around is preparing to bloom. And for the first time in years, I allow myself to smile. Without panic, without remorse, just because I exist.